Hey, everybody, and welcome to Unfiltered. I am your host, Kaiya McCullough, and I am so excited to finally share with you guys this passion project that I've been working on for the past few months. I can't believe it's finally here, but it really is the love child of everything that the past year has given to me and shown me. And again, I'm so excited to share it with you guys. Basically, this show is going to be me talking about the intersection of race and politics, sports, pop culture, you name it. We'll talk about it through the lens of my unfiltered thoughts and through the lens of my life experience, which is pretty crazy. But I'm going to make sure I bring guests on to make sure I'm not just giving you monologues all the time. And yeah, this week I'm super excited. My very first guest. It makes sense to me to have the person who conceived me as the very first guest for the conception of this podcast. So we are going to be joined by my mother, Amy Thorne. And we're really just going to talk about where it all started for me, my childhood, some of the trauma that I experienced and that she experienced, what it was like growing up in a predominantly white town, the basics. So we're really going to lay a foundation for the rest of the podcast and start off the conversation really well. So stay tuned. Super excited to have this conversation with my very own mother. Hello there, Mother.
Hello, child.
Welcome to my podcast. Thanks for being my very first guest.
Yes, of course. Thanks for having me.
Would you like to introduce yourself to our audience? I know you, but they don't.
My name is Amy Thorne, and I am Kaiya's mom. I also have another child, Jaron, who's Kaiya's brother, and he is 9 and absolutely adores his big sister. So I had him when Kaiya was about 14, so she's been there through everything. So she was awesome and is an awesome big sister. What else, Kai? What do I do?
Yeah, sure. What do you do? Where'd you go to school? The basics.
I went to school at UCLA also. I was a gymnast there. 89 to 92, 93, 93. And then I was on the 5-year plan, though, so it took me 5 years to graduate. But we were there right at the onset. We didn't win a national championship there, but it's a good program. But I did gymnastics there. I was a soc major, and then graduated from college, did corporate America for a little bit and decided it's not really what I wanted to do. And so I went back and got my master's degree in educational psychology. And Kaiya, what were you, about 8 maybe when I was doing that?
Honestly, my childhood is a blur. I don't know. I have no conception of time.
I just remember sitting at the table with you doing homework at the same time. So at that time, I was full-time single mom working when Grammy was with us. Yes. And so now I'm a school psychologist, and so I work with special ed children with special needs in the special education department, and I love my job.
Ooh, thank you for that introduction. I knew all of it, but I'm super glad that you're here to share our story with the world. I know that is daunting, but that's just how we roll here. So I'm going to start this trend on my podcast where I'm going to tell a story about the person that is my guest for the week.
Oh,
and I mean, generally I want it to be like a funny story or happy story. I'll ask you to do the same at the end. But for me, this story, even though I almost die in it, I think it's pretty funny. And I picked it because it was literally the first thing that popped in my head. And I think I like this story so much because every time somebody tells it, every time we talk about it, we all end up laughing. And I think it's funny, and it just kind of reflects our relationship and our life experience, because when bad things happen, we still keep laughing through it. So we used to go camping every summer up in Washington. And I was learning how to water ski one year. and I was using these like training skis where the handlebar is like connected to the skis, and on the other end there's another handlebar for the grown-up or the adult to responsibly hold on to it so they can let go when you wipe out, because again, my handlebar is attached to my skis. So when I let go, I'm still attached to the skis. So it doesn't do anything. So the geniuses that are my mother and my aunt and uncle and God knows who else.
It was just us.
They decided that it was a genius idea to tie the other end to the boat, so they had less work to do, which, I can't blame them. Like, I want to just go and go and go. But so they start pulling the boat, and I get up on my skis and I quickly fall down and I let go, but I'm still attached to the boat. And so for about 10 to 15 seconds, I was being dragged underwater at like 50 miles an hour in this boat because I couldn't let go of the skis and it was so attached to the boat, and they didn't realize. And I was just underwater, and they were just, I don't even know. I don't know what they were doing.
Uncle Mike was screaming, "Let go, let go."
And so thankfully the skis detached while I was underwater, and I was able to get up, and I didn't drown, thankfully for all of us. But still one of the funniest stories in our family, and I love retelling it, and I will never let you hear the end of it. I promise you. So
I'm so sorry, but what doesn't kill you makes you stronger.
Exactly, and that's why I picked it. So I'm glad that you can laugh through it. I can too, even though I was the one who almost died. So
oh my gosh, we felt horrible though afterwards, especially when we told Jeremy, and he was like, "You did what?"
I just don't know how you guys thought that was a good idea, but I digress. I don't know. Anyways, all right. So with that out of the way, my near-death, one of several actually near-death experiences with you. I wanted to talk about in this episode what it was like growing up for me. And obviously, being my mother, you have a big part in that. I think you did a pretty good job, but obviously there were some speed bumps along the way.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, a lot of it goes back, a lot of my worldview goes back to Orange County, which is where I was born and where I was raised. I was born in Irvine. And raised in like the Lake Forest, Mission Viejo area. If anybody's familiar, you might not be, but it's a predominantly white place, has and will be. I did a paper on it in college about how it basically started like far right conservatism. So yeah, and you moved there when you were a teenager?
Yes, I actually moved. Well, I moved down to Oregon moved from Oregon to Washington. I think when I was 11, down from Washington to Orange County when I was 13 for gymnastics. Lived in Placentia. I don't know if you know where that's at.
Yeah.
For a year, and then moved to Huntington Beach for 4 years. That's where I went to high school. And then I went to college, went to UCLA, and LA is quite different than Orange County. And then when I was done with college, I came down here to Lake Forest, and because your aunt was down here. And then that's kind of and then when your dad graduated college, he moved down with us, and that was obviously before you.
So how similar do you think Orange County is nowadays to what it was when you first were there, or like when I was growing up too? Like, how has the evolution of Orange County been in your experience? Because Huntington Beach is like notoriously very racist,
right?
And it still is.
Yeah, I didn't. And what's crazy about that is that I didn't even know that when I was in the thick of it, because I think maybe because of gymnastics, I was in such a sheltered bubble, and I was like kind of a teenager that was all just about gymnastics, and so that was my worldview. And I mean, I had friends who were other races, so at that point in my life, I was one of those white people that, I don't see color, because I didn't. But, as I've evolved and seen the world around me, and with, a black child, you see, yes, color does exist. People a lot differently than others. But I think that's kind of what my worldview was like during that time. And then I went to UCLA in Los Angeles, and then I'm really in just, a group of all kinds of different races. I mean, you remember our friend group growing up, right?
Yeah, I do.
And I think when I moved down here, and then, I was down here for a couple of years before I got pregnant with you, a few years actually. And again, I've always had a very diverse friend group. So it's never, and I wasn't very politically active at that point, to be quite honest. So I was kind of just in my little bubble, which I think a lot of people do. And I think a lot of white people do who don't have friends in outside groups, or who don't have friends in different, income brackets, or they aren't exposed to other people. They just kind of live in their own little bubble.
Yeah.
And so I would say me being with your dad, and then having you as a child, and then it expanded my view quite a bit. But I've always had a very, very, very diverse group of friends from college on.
Yeah, and it's interesting you brought that up too, just because I didn't even really think about that. But I think for people to understand like where I came from, or where, I was raised, like they have to understand how much of a bubble Orange County is. Like it is really hard to get, like if it weren't for the fact that like you had a really diverse friend group, like you may have turned out completely different. And I've had friends who I'll probably bring on this podcast later who were sucked into the bubble of Orange County. I mean, the influence of like the church that we grew up next to, Saddleback Church, and the influence of, right-wing politics. It's heavy. And I mean, the Real Housewives of Orange County is like not far off of a depiction.
And the hills.
Yeah, and the hills. That's like how it is, or like Laguna Beach.
But I think because that's not my jam, so I kind of avoid that. And so, you probably had a different experience than you could have had I been not aware, and we hadn't been, friends with everybody we were friends with.
Well, especially in South County, because South County is very, very predominantly white. Like less so in North County, where there's more Hispanic. I mean, overwhelmingly, there's not very many Black people in Orange County, which, I mean, obviously influenced how I grew up. But I think there's more people of color a little bit north. But where we were, it was like a person of color desert. Like there just didn't really exist the community there. And that's why I'm thankful that we kind of created our own community, because I did grow up with people who at least look kind of like me when we went to like family things, or, we have play cousins and my aunts and uncles who like aren't blood, but who help raise me. But yeah. And so I guess my next question with that is like, were you ever scared once that bubble kind of burst for you about raising a child who is going to be Black in Orange County? Like, did that fear ever cross your mind? It didn't have to, but did it?
Yeah, I don't know. Of course I worried about that, not to the extent that maybe I should have, only because, again, my own naivete. But, we've always raised you to be strong and confident, and thinking that you can accomplish anything. And, I guess I had always poised in the back of my mind, just waiting for that day that you would come home and somebody at school called you the N-word. Like, I was really fearful of that. But even like at your school, there weren't a lot of Black children. But I mean, look at your friend group.
Yeah.
You were in elementary, yeah. You had a very diverse friend group too. So you that wasn't your jam either. You kind of, made sure you surrounded yourself with maybe not necessarily people that look like you, because there weren't that many, but people who, just the melting pot.
Yeah. I mean, as I've grown up, I've realized like most of my friend groups throughout elementary school, middle school, high school is very diverse. At least as diverse as you can get in South Orange County. But yeah, I don't know. Maybe I got that from you. Maybe that was just the influence of like the people that we surrounded ourselves with. But I don't know. Were there any negative comments that stick out that you can remember in raising me that really struck you as like being racist, or just like making you uncomfortable? or did anybody ever like question your relationship to me? Because I mean, I don't really think I looked like you
You don't
when
look
I was.
anything like me.
I look like you now, but
A little bit. You have
on your
mannerisms
face.
right here. But
Yeah.
I think, I tell you that there was times when you were little that people asked if I was your nanny, which was funny to me. And then they would always ask if they could touch your hair. But nothing really outright. And, I thought about this before when I did another podcast with you, that I don't know if it's something that was not intentional, not the right word, but I mean, you were always really good at everything you did. You were like top of your class academically, top athletically, active. You were a rule follower, like you didn't get in trouble. Like everything you did, you were the top at it. And so I almost feel like that was like a protective shield that kind of maybe kept some of that racism out. You know what I mean? Because I don't know how to put this gingerly, but the stereotypes of what maybe some white people think Black folks are like, or how they act, or you didn't fit that stereotypical role, so maybe you were a little bit more protected from it in our environment, in our setting. And I don't know, maybe the fact that you're light skinned.
Yeah.
I
was gonna say, I definitely have to acknowledge like the way in which my light-skinnedness, my biracial complexion has, I think, shielded me from a lot and has given me a lot of privilege. And I think that I am what mainstream and what a lot of white folks think is like a palatable Black girl.
Right.
I mean, you see like the miscastings in media and movies and TV shows of like characters who are supposed to be very dark skinned who end up being played by like Zendaya, and nothing wrong about, these light skinned actresses, but I think we definitely take up a space that should be reserved for darker skinned Black girls. And I think that, even though I didn't look very similar to a lot of people in Orange County and I was darker and it was very clear that I wasn't white, I think that I did, get a lot of privilege from the way I look. Mm-hmm. So that is important to acknowledge too.
I also think, and I wonder how your experience would have differed had you been raised predominantly with your dad. If your dad was your main caretaker and he was the one interacting with folks at school and, folks in sports, and he was your main point person, and how that perception would have been, trickled down to you in our community. I think it would have been a lot different.
Well, it's funny too, because like I've never been questioned of like my dad being my dad when I was out with him, like growing up when I was down with him in San Diego. I don't know if that had to do that we were down in San Diego, which is a little bit different of like a racial makeup, but never. I look like my dad though too. I never got a question from, whether or not I was his child, but I think about like all the interactions that we had up in San Diego or up in Orange County when my dad would like be around. And I mean, people were intimidated by him. And I think a lot of it has to do with racial biases that people hold. And I think a lot of it has to do with racism. So you're absolutely right. It probably would have been a lot different, especially if he would have raised me and been the one to interact up in Orange County. Mm-hmm. Because it's very clearly still very instilled in the culture of Orange County of like that racism. And, even though it flipped blue in the past couple of elections, it is the literal place of right-wing conservatism, which
behind
I think carries, I think it carries with it a really powerful and entrenching legacy of racism. So, I mean, again, that's why I think it's important to talk about this part first, because I think people really do have to understand like how difficult it was growing up in a place where there was just not a ton of people who looked like me.
Yeah, and actually, to be quite truthful, there's some guilt that I harbor about that too. But you kind of go where the job is for you, and where your family is. And so
I mean, overall, what was it like raising a Black child as a white woman in Orange County and as a single mother too? I mean, I was also raised by my dad, but obviously I stayed with you a lot of the time just because where my school was, because you guys chose to keep me in the same school system once you guys got divorced.
Yeah, that was really important to me to keep you in that same school because I bounced around so much growing up, and I knew those are your people. Those are like your solid foundation. And you branched out as like you went as you matriculated through. But I feel like that was important for me, for you to have that. Those, I mean, you are friends with people that you've been friends with since kindergarten.
Yeah, I have. I mean, I'm grateful for it, but was there any I'm curious, was there any push when you and my dad were still dating about you guys being an interracial couple? I know it was the 90s, so we'd like to think that it was a little bit post-racial, but what was that experience like? Especially,
Well,
I mean, it was probably different in LA, but
yeah. Well, have you seen your dad? Do you think anybody's going to say anything to him?
no. No, I do not.
Well, that's a little funny story I have about you too. I don't know. I think, growing up in those two different households, you one time tried to come at me with like, well, my dad doesn't make me do that. And I was like, do I look 6 feet tall and black? You were like, ah. But no, not really at that point. But again, the circles that I traveled and that we traveled, but yeah, there were, maybe places where I worked, snide comments here and there, but super passive aggressive, like disguised as humor, or old friends that maybe I went to high school with, or just like, but again, nobody would say anything, especially if your dad was there, like outright, outwardly.
Yeah.
They'd be, in person, it'd be a different story, but comments here and there, but again, nothing to the point where it affected me. And then your dad and your dad's family, I know how your dad's family is, come from Oceanside, and that's military area, and it was very diverse down there, and so very accepting on that end. Yeah, nothing. I don't have like a specific incident where I can say, oh my God, yeah, this person said this to me, because I don't know, I might not be sitting here talking to you.
No, yeah, I was gonna say, like, my dad will make comments a lot of the time and just be like, we shielded you from a lot. And I think the past 5 years of my life have really shown me how much you guys did shield me from, and not in a bad way, just like any parent would, trying to protect their kid from like the evils of the world. But it's really been a reckoning for me. And it's just funny how often my dad will say that. He's like, I'm sorry that I shielded you from that for so long, because I mean, it really was like, it was like you said, like, I don't feel as if I experienced nearly comparable amounts to Black kids my age, or darker skinned Black kids my age, even in the same area. But a lot of it was very passive aggressive, covert racism, with my hair. I know my hair isn't curly right now, but yeah, like, just thinking back and just thinking about how difficult it was for me to even conceptualize the idea of race, given how diverse the group that we hung out with, or that I'm around, wasn't. I knew I didn't look exactly like my dad or his family, and I knew I didn't look exactly like you or your family. So it was difficult. And just like, I still think about, like, I remember there was one time I feel like I threw a tantrum where I was just like, I could not figure out why I did not look like you, or why I didn't have your hair. Like, I could not figure it out. And I remember throwing a tantrum about it. Or even something similar with just like Barbie dolls. Like, it wasn't until Bratz dolls where I really felt like, oh, that looks like me. And then I always wanted to be Yasmin because she looked the closest to me.
Mm-hmm.
So like, she had my same complexion. So I don't know, like, it was tough, but I'm glad we made it through.
Yes. Me too.
I made it through.
Yeah.
I feel like we could have gone a lot worse, to be honest.
Yes, agreed. I mean, of course, mistakes were made, but
none that were life-threatening, or maybe there were, based on that story. There was a few times. So moving on a little bit from my childhood, I guess, with that experience of growing up in Orange County and couple that with our generational trauma and experience, there's a lot of trauma there to unpack. And I think that for both of us, like, we've talked about this a ton before, but just how generational trauma just seep into current day wounds and how it exasperates issues maybe that we haven't been able to resolve in our lifetime yet. So I wanted to talk about maybe like how we both sort of started embracing, going to marches, and for me, my activism, and how that was influenced by maybe our past experiences.
Well, I know as I got older and became a mother, and especially a mother of a Black biracial child, I started becoming more in tune with society and the politics and everything out there, and just really kind of ingrained myself and started, learning and educating myself and trying to, if I couldn't teach you certain things, or if I couldn't be that person for you, trying to expose you to other people who could.
Yeah.
But as far as like activism, I know one thing that really propelled me was the former guy.
Yeah.
The former president, like that really kind of got me up and going. And then just seeing you kind of finding your way in college. And I think really when you changed your major from, was it bio or what were you?
It was like neuroscience.
Neuroscience to political science. I was like, oh, okay, here we go. And that really kind of helped trigger.
Which you resisted at first. You resisted that. Both of you did. Both of you and my dad were like, you're changing your major? Because I was like halfway through college at that point. And you're just like, are you sure? And I was like, yes.
When you laid it out and you said you already had all the credits figured out and how much time it would take, and it wouldn't cause you any more time, and we were okay with it. Once you did your PowerPoint slideshow, you need to tell everybody that anytime you want to put something forth, she would do a PowerPoint presentation to me.
I still do that because it is the most logical way to organize my thoughts. No, but yeah, I mean, obviously, what is it? 44 was a big push into the political realm, but and even before that, like in high school, I had been finding my voice with the Pledge of Allegiance. Do you remember when I first was like, I stopped standing for that thing? Like, I am so mad. And I don't know if you remember that one time when that guy told me to go back to Africa, but I was just like,
yep. And I was ready to back you up, if I got a call from the school or anything. So
yeah. And it was interesting too, because, I didn't want to do anything that, and I feel like this has been a pattern that I've followed up until this point. Obviously now I'm unfiltered, but you don't want to bite the hand that feeds you. A lot of times you don't want to say things that'll jeopardize your position within an organization or within a school or a college or a team. And in that case, like, you were doing your internship or whatever for becoming a school psych at my school, which was, irritating to see you all the time when I was trying to be a teenager. But, I didn't want to jeopardize your position within the district or, jeopardize my scholarship as I was trying to go play college somewhere. But I think ultimately, like, things just gradually progressed. And one thing that I valued is that you guys have always been Democrats. It's been a pretty liberal household that I was growing up in. So I feel like I always had the space to explore my own feelings and educate myself. And I mean, you can attest to this. Tell me if I'm wrong, but I feel like we've always had very grown up conversations since I was like a young kid. So I'd say, our experience as a family and, your guys' worldviews definitely influence mine, but I greatly appreciate like not being confined to stay in some box that was assigned for me, like most of the kids that I was growing up around. I mean, there are still people that come up to me and are just like, like it was really hard to like educate myself and like get out of that line of thinking. And there's people who haven't done it to this day and who I can't even interact with, or just because they're still in that narrow-minded thinking. So I have to say I appreciate that from you.
You are so welcome. I just wanted to indoctrinate you into my own line of thinking. That was my I'm just kidding.
See, I feel like that's what the fake news is saying. They're like, these liberals are just indoctrinating their kids and blah 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 blah. But
yeah, I was anything but.
Yeah, I really feel like it was me doing my evolution.
Yeah, I concur.
I'm curious, do you see anything in me that is like a direct line of like, I mean, obviously I'm still very similar to when I was a kid, but do you see anything that like stands out that like when you see me do it today, you're like, oh my gosh, you used to do that when you were younger, or like just something that's like a direct thread of like some habit or some mannerism or some way of thinking that I still have from when I was a kid that I wouldn't remember?
Well, I think you remember. I know that you have always been like highly motivated and highly self-disciplined, and you've been intrinsically motivated, not extrinsically motivated at all. You wanted to learn and go to school for the fact that you were learning, not because, I mean, grades, that really motivated you because you're so damn competitive. You're probably the only person, or besides your dad and me, that are more competitive. My God. I remember you told me one time that you hated to lose more than you liked to win.
Still true.
Yeah. So that's if anything, I still see that. Like, you're studying now, right? You study a few hours a day, and that's on your own. That's like you've always been so self-disciplined. And I remember Jeremy telling me a couple times that he would wake up and go downstairs in the kitchen. You'd be at the kitchen table until 2 or 3 in the morning doing your homework. Just being able to balance it all. But just so, and I didn't ever have to tell you to do that. How many times did you ever hear me tell you to do your homework?
Never.
You just wanted to learn for the sake of learning. And I just see that insatiable, appetite for information and like reasons, and you want to know why and learn it from all kinds of different people. So I'd say that's like probably the trait that, and you've been like that since you were little.
I do think that is like a very solid thing that I have carried over from my childhood, which I'm grateful for. So because I think that means that it is deeply ingrained within me, and it's not something that I will easily lose. So that's a plus for me.
Right.
So with my evolution, obviously you've been there from the very beginning, and you've seen me kind of grow into the woman I am today and the activist I am today, and everything that I am today. How have you seen your own evolution change course in response to mine and in response to my growth? Because I feel like our relationship is unique in that, yes, you're my parent, and yes, you're the boss, but I don't feel as if you've ever felt like you were better than me, or that I didn't deserve the respect that you gave me. So how have you learned from my own journey? I know. I don't know if I've ever told you that, but yeah, I've always felt like, I mean, and you know me, I don't really respect authority very easily, and I think that respect is earned. And I respected you guys because you guys deserved it, and I felt respected. But like, how do you think that your own like journey in discovering, how to be a white ally has been changed, or has mirrored, or has been developed through my own journey?
Well, I think, just kind of what I touched on before about that naivete, like, oh, I don't see color, I'm just colorblind, versus like, no, you can't be colorblind. It's, a systemic issue. It's all of us. And, I think one of the quotes that hits me the most is just, what is it, MLK, that silence is complicity, right?
I can't fact check you on that right now, but I'm
pretty
sure you're right.
But just being in my own space and being able to sit back and observe and listen with an open heart and an open mind and hear perspectives, and without judgment or without making excuses. Like, I don't want to, I think I kind of maybe transitioned from being like, oh, not me, to, but not all white people and not me. I mean, we still kind of joke about that, you and I, because you'll say something and I'm like, wait a minute. You're like, Mom.
Yeah.
Going from that perspective to, well, no, just sit back and listen. This is not your space to take up. I think too, there was a transition, like, no, not me, but then me wanting to do what I could to help in maybe all the wrong ways. Like, it's not your turn, Amy. It's not your turn to speak up. You need to sit back and listen and engage other white people like you. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah. I don't know why I just thought of this, but when you talked about engaging with other white people who are like in your space, like, how has your whole Facebook thing evolved in the past 4 years? I'm not very active on Facebook anymore because I can't deal with it because of irritating people, but have you lost a lot of relationships in coming to that evolution of thought? Or, how have you handled that in the midst of, especially in the past year, with this sort of like racial reckoning that has been happening after George Floyd was murdered? Like, have you even noticed a shift in yourself since then?
Yeah.
Would you say?
Yeah, I've definitely unfriended and blocked a lot more than I think I ever have, or just completely disregarded certain people. And it's a fine line you want to balance between like respecting other people to have, have their own opinion. But if you're not agreeing with me, like, you can have a different opinion, but if what you believe in is like morally unjust and, ethically unjust, and just if what you think is going to have a direct or an indirect impact on my child and the people that I love, then
Peace.
Deuces.
Yeah, no, I definitely I've unfriended a lot of people and had to shift a lot of relationships and really protect my sacred energy. I almost burnt myself out to death this past year, and I mean, I'm getting the help I need now, but yeah, it was really tough. Especially in feeling so alone, which is, to an extent, like, that's how it's been a lot of my life. Like, I've had you, I've had our family, I've had, Kenna, I've had my dad and his family, but like a lot of this journey I feel like has been walked alone, and that's not a bad thing. It's just, the consequence of the circumstances. I didn't look like you didn't look like me, I didn't look like my dad, he didn't look like me, and those are the people who are your first guides in this life, like your parents. So I think that's one of the things that I've dealt with for most of my life, but also this past year I've learned to maybe, I don't want to say that I've become okay with carrying that solo burden. I mean, we were talking about this the other day, how it feels, it's a very, very lonely road activism is, because a lot of times you feel like, you're just doing it alone and you're carrying the weight of the world on you, but I don't know.
Well, like you've embraced it a little bit more,
Yeah, and that's why I don't want to say that I've, fallen prey to it, but I think I've embraced the burden almost a little bit more than I did when I was a kid.
Well, that's true. I mean, you think about it from the perspective of, as a white woman, I'm never going to be able to see things or experience things from your perspective. And as a Black man, your dad's never going to see or experience anything from your perspective. Like, you don't have to, then probably McKenna.
Yeah.
That's like in your close knit group of, somebody that's going to experience what you've experienced.
Yeah. And I think about but you really have been like a huge influence on me. I mean, you're the reason that, I still remember the very first women's march that we went to, right after Grump got elected.
Was that when you had knee surgery? Was that one?
It was the one before that. It was the very first inaugural one. We went to the one in Orange County.
Yeah. And then we were like, screw this. We're going to go to LA next year.
Yeah. This isn't radical enough for us. Well, and then, it evolved. And so, like, we started with that very first one, and it was just us and your friends.
My friend
and then we went to the LA one the next year, and you almost didn't want me to go because I just had knee surgery a week before. But I was like, what? Yeah, I know. I was like, fuck the patriarchy. I'm tearing it down. And then we went to the protest for the Parkland shooting, and then it evolved into being able to lead the LA Women's March, which was just like ridiculous. And I got like an article from that, or got to talk in a big article for that. And it's definitely evolved. And you were one of the first people too that not one of the first person I told that I was going to start kneeling.
Yeah, that was crazy too. I don't know. I think I told you this, that I was watching it on the news, and I forget which incident there was. And that's really sad. The fact that there's been so many that I can't recall which one it was.
Yeah.
But it was a lot of, I don't know if it's when Kaepernick started kneeling again or.
Yeah, I think it was.
And so I was watching it and I was like, oh, she's going to want to kneel. She is going to want to kneel. All of a sudden, beep, beep. I'm like, and it was a text message from you. And then you called me in tears. And I was like, okay, talk to your coaches. I got you.
It was overwhelming. And it's funny because I haven't really heard you tell that story too many times. I feel like I've told that story like in so many interviews and so many articles and so many, whatever podcasts. But
yeah, sitting on my bed and I was watching the news and I'm like, well, no, God, I'm like, oh, okay, we got this. Because I knew it.
Were you worried when I told you that?
I was a little bit that, the backlash you were going to get, but I was like, fuck it. Like, I got you.
Yeah. Sorry. I remember you telling me like, Kaiya, like, not saying that this is like I completely support you and I think what you're doing is amazing, but you're like, there's gonna be like consequences, like, and you have to be prepared for that. And I was like, you know what, I don't care what they are, like, I am done with this, I am going to revolt. Like, I remember being so fired up, but it was really you that helped me curate that path for myself. And I talk about this a lot with you and my therapist about how much, your guys' is not validate. Well, yeah, your validation, you and my dad's validation has meant to me as a kid. And even now, like, I feel like I am disappointed. If I disappoint you, I feel like the world's going to end. So, I mean, it really was like a big reason why I did decide that I was, strong enough to do it, because I knew that I was supported by you and my dad. And, at the end of the day, that's like the only thing that mattered to me, was that at least I would still have my parents to support me. Like, even if the rest of the world wanted me dead and wanted to scream at me, like, if I had your guys' support, I was totally fine.
You'd be okay.
Yeah. So I guess one of my like closing questions for this conversation then is just like, what advice do you have for other white people who are looking to be allies, other white mothers who are going to have biracial kids in a non like fetishy weird way. What advice do you have for them on, letting go of your own white fragility and, not imposing your own white guilt on the Black community specifically, or on people of color, but more specifically the Black community? I don't know, what do you think has really centered your journey in your evolution, and what advice can you give to them?
Well, I think kind of what I touched on before, a couple of things, is just recognizing that you will never have the same experiences that I've had, and I will never have the experiences that you've had, right? And acknowledging those, and educating yourself. Like, listen, don't just read and listen to perspectives and hear stories and integrate yourself. Things change a lot when things become personal for you. When you have a Black child, it changes your perspective a lot. When you have Black friends, when you have a Black brother-in-law, when things are close to you, it changes, and it's sad that it has to take that, but it does. It personalizes it, and it changes that perspective. And then you realize, oh, that is not cool. Like I said, oblivious to some things before. I think I told you before, I went out to dinner with your dad and his family, like when we first started dating, and we did not get sat in the restaurant for like an hour, and your granny was livid. And I was like, well, maybe they're just busy. And she was like, no. Like, so I had to take a step back, and that wasn't like disregard. I wasn't intentionally disregarding what it was happening. I was just ignorant of it. So I guess just really involving yourself to the point where you're not like trying to like make up for that white guilt, but just listen and learn and absorb, and then ask, what can I do to be helpful? Not just assume what to do. And I guess just taking that step back and not holding that space. It's really important.
And I feel like it says a lot about you and your allyship, especially because, and just how powerful it is, just because, it's not always easy to get told what to do by your daughter. I know that I'm a very imposing person. I'm a very overwhelming person, and it's not always easy to like let go of your pride and your ego and like sit back and learn from anybody. But then, even though we do have a very like close relationship, it's not always easy to sit back and be like, my daughter is like the one telling me this, so I think it says a lot about.
I think well, I appreciate that, but I think the thing about that is that this is what if you were trying to tell me something about gymnastics, I might be not so accepting, but this is you, this is what and I told you the other night, I trust you. I learn a lot from you. As much as like you think that you learn from me, I learn a lot from you, and I trust you, and I trust the process, and I trust that you trust yourself. And I think that is what you kind of learn to let go of ego. And what's been one of my sayings that I've said since I had you, and then I had Jaren, is how I want to raise my kids. Do you remember?
I don't at the top of my head, but when you say it, I'm gonna know.
It would be one of the tattoos I would want to get if I ever got a tattoo, and it was give them roots, then give them wings.
Oh.
So I've done my job, right? Now it's time for me to sit back and let you fly, and trust in the job that your dad and your step parents and your grannies and your families and everybody have done. We've done our job. Now it's time to let you fly. So, you have your wings. And so I trust that process, but I trust you. Like, I know your judgment. I know your knowledge base. I know your passion. I know your integrity. So it's easy for me to sit back and just say, okay, this is your reign. This is your realm here. You take the reins, and I'll follow.
Anybody who knows how big of a control freak you are, and I am, would know that was difficult. You say it's easy, but I'm giving you more credit than you're giving yourself, because you are a control freak. And that's not a bad thing. It's just,
I know.
So I guess one final question before I'd let you tell your story. Like, I feel like I know the answer, but I also need the validation. Are you proud of me and
Of
everything
course
I
I'm
am?
proud of you. Yes. Would you ever doubt that?
No, I wouldn't. That's what I'm saying. I already know the answer. I need the validation.
Yes, I'm extremely proud of you, and not just for soccer like you think. Everything. I mean, anything you set your mind to, you accomplish. Like, and that's historically been what you've done. That's why I believe in you. I believe in you to no end, probably more than you believe in yourself.
Probably. No, probably. I mean, don't get me wrong, I believe in myself, but I think you and my dad are up there fighting for the first spot.
Well, I think that's one thing too, just to comment on that real quick. Your dad and I have, and even your step-parents have always, told you you can do and be anything you want. And you've said this before, that you grew up thinking you could do anything and conquer the world. And I think my thought process, especially as a white woman raising a Black biracial child, like, I consciously made the decision that I would rather have you be too much than not enough, because I'd rather you be too much so I could like contain it a little bit and channel it than not enough. Because as a Black woman, the experiences that you were going to have, I knew it from the time I conceived you, was going to be something completely different. And so to build you up and build you up and build you up, and then have to mold it and channel it, that was my goal. That was my goal.
And do you think you accomplished that?
I think so.
You might have had to serve me a couple slices of humble pie along the way, but I think so too.
Yes, you've had a lot of crow and a lot of humble pie.
All right, well, closing up, I'm going to let you tell one of your favorite stories about us or our relationship or anything in that realm. So take it away.
I have a few, but one thing I think that sticks with me, that kind of speaks to like how you are right now and how you've evolved, is, I don't know if you remember going to all the ODP camps in Ojai.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, multiple years in a row, you would be the one that was not picked, right? You would be either the alternate or on the cusp. And just always that one. I can't even begin to tell you how many times we stopped at that McDonald's on the exit going back to the freeway, and you got a burger and a shake, and you would cry and cry and cry. And I don't know how many damn times I said that Michael Jordan story about him making his varsity basketball team. I mean, it was the same story. I felt like I was in Groundhog Day, because it was the same time, and like my heart broke, but just having to like, reiterate. And I remember telling you at one time, I think you were upset about like politics or something in either at school or soccer. But I remember, and I don't think you told me, because I brought this up to you not too long ago, and you didn't remember me telling you this, but I remember you were pissed off about something, that it's not fair. And I was like, you know what, Kaiya? Sometimes you got to play the game. You got to play the game so you can get to the point. You got to follow the rules and play the game so you can get to the point where you make the rules yourself, where you're the one in control. Do you remember me telling you that?
I still don't, but I'm sure it happened.
Like one day I said, sometimes you got to play these little games, and you got to, white patriarchy, you kind of have to go with it so you can position yourself to when you get to the point where you're the one making the rules. You're the one in charge. You're the one who says what goes. And that's kind of what I remember about you.
There's too many to pick.
Yeah, there really are.
Truthfully, I feel like our relationship has remained very similar throughout the years. As I get older, another reason I found it important to have you first is because as I get older, I see myself.
Why did you just do that?
I see myself turning into you more and more, which you're an amazing woman. So again, like that's just me joking, but yeah. So
yeah, especially like when we say the same exact thing at the same exact time.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's that's why I did the puke thing.
Get out of my brain, get out of my head.
Not because you're awful or anything, just because I see it happening, and I'm gonna end up just like your mom, Grammy, it's like a clear line. We talk about generational stuff. We are a clear path. We are just one line through our entire genealogy. I don't know. But yeah, so thanks for being on my first episode. Sorry it was not rough, but it was the first run through. So I'm glad that it went well.
I'm really happy you're doing this. I think you have a lot to give and a voice to put out there. And I know you had said you'd asked me before, like what advice to give to you or to anybody else. But on the one vein of you saying to me, I'm a control freak. But do you remember what's the one thing that I told you since you were a little girl?
Apparently, you've had a ton of these. I don't remember. You said that's the second time you said that's the one thing.
What's the 30-second thing I've told you since you were a little girl?
I don't know. I need a chart.
About controlling the controllables. You can't
yeah.
You can't control what people say or do or act or how they treat you. All you can control is what?
How you react
to it.
Yeah. I do remember that one. I need to make a book of all this stuff, essentially.
Book of mommyisms. Yeah. You can't control what people say to you, do to you, think about you, treat you. All you can control is how you react to it. So that would be my advice.
Well, I will continue to control how I react to things and, hopefully control the whole damn table once I get up there. Or break the table. I don't think the table needs to be there. So thanks for being on. That's the show for this week. Thanks if you're still here listening. I appreciate you being here. Stay tuned for more conversations like this, completely unfiltered. It's definitely going to get a lot more intense, especially as we start going into more pop culture and political stuff. This is just laying the foundation for the rest of the show. So make sure you subscribe, rate, and review because that helps, us get discovered and helps me do what I do. And tweet any comments that you may have or topic suggestions that you have. Would love to hear feedback on it. And yeah, make sure to follow us on the socials too. It'll be down below. We don't necessarily have them right now at the time of filming because this is episode number 1, but they will be linked below. So thanks, everybody. Thanks for watching. Appreciate you or watching or listening. I don't know what you're doing with your life. Don't laugh at me, mother.
I'm the only one who can.